It is, of course, a very sensitive issue. Let's bring in for some wider analysis Allison Sommer, journalist with the Israeli newspaper Haaretz. Allison, thank you very much for being with us. Give us a sense of how this news, and we've heard from Yair Lapid, give us a sense of how this news is going down in Israel.
Well, obviously, it's not a very popular decision. Israelis consider Jerusalem their capital. And as your report reflected, this goes back to 2018 when President Donald Trump moved the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, and Australia, which was then led by a conservative government, along with another handful of countries, did not actually move their embassies to Jerusalem, but they made statements recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital. And the Australian Prime Minister at the time said that he would leave the door open to possibly moving it back there. So this decision to reverse the tide by the new, more left-wing administration is obviously viewed as a blow by the Israelis.
And can you sum up for us Yair Lapid's situation? I mean, clearly Israel, on all sides, I imagine, not happy with what Australia is saying and not willing to listen.
No, obviously. And Yair Lapid, as we know, is involved in a very intense election campaign at the moment. In 2 weeks, Israelis go to the polls. And part of the way that he is competing with former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is on the diplomacy front. Who is going to be the stronger leader? Who is going to be able to help Israel further its diplomatic goals and relations with the rest of the world? And so this is going to be used by the Netanyahu camp as a stick to point to Yair Lapid and say, look, the Israeli government is weaker now. Australia took this step because they felt like Lapid would not be as tough on them as Netanyahu might have been.
Indeed, and as you point out, another election coming up in Israel, of course. The situation there is extremely finely balanced, and any word out of place by Yair Lapid or any other politician could really influence what happens next. May I ask you about the Palestinian perspective on all this? Because perhaps this represents in some ways a victory for the Palestinian cause, in inverted commas. But how significant is this?
It is significant for the Palestinians, especially since the tide has not been moving in their direction lately. The Arab parties are in very weak and troubled positions in these upcoming Israeli elections. There's a lot of unrest in the West Bank with the various factions competing with each other. So, any kind of diplomatic victory, as symbolic and small as it might be, as this Australian step is viewed as an important victory for the Palestinian cause, and they're doing as much as they can to praise it publicly and project a sense that they've accomplished something.
In terms of what this means going forward, is it likely to kind of compromise the relationship between Israel and Australia?
Well, the Australian ambassador has been called in for a reprimand or for a serious conversation, and there is talks of steps to take against the Australian government. The two countries, though, have a very close and warm relationship. And Australia, it's framing its decision as joining or returning to the international consensus. Again, it was the part of a very small number of countries that followed in Donald Trump's path and decided to give some form of recognition to Jerusalem. So in reversing its position, it's doing no more than sort of returning to the position of the vast number of countries in Europe that are very friendly with Israel. So I don't think it's going to be a major crisis between the two countries. Definitely an unpleasant point. But I think the Israelis also understand that there are internal domestic politics at play here in Australia, and this was a step taken by the new Australian government that took over in May to sort of distinguish itself and its foreign policy from the previous government.
And Morrison into Albanese and things changing in Australia, and that outlook being reflected on foreign policy too. Allison Sommer from Haaretz, thank you very much for giving us your analysis here in France 24. We appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.